The apartment door in Beirut eased open at 2:47 in the morning. A woman filled the doorway, her outline framed by the weak fluorescent light humming in the hall. She wore a plain dress, held a small handbag at her side, and stepped in with the calm air of someone getting home after a late meal. Inside, Ali Hassan Salameh, operations chief of Black September and the planner behind the Munich Massacre, raised his head from his desk. He had been sorting through coded notes sent from Damascus, trying to make sense of shifting signals and upcoming tasks. When he saw her, he recognized her right away. She was the neighbor he had gotten used to seeing over the past 6 months, the friendly European woman who smiled in the elevator, who chatted about the weather, who had once asked to borrow a bit of sugar. What Salameh did not know, and could not have guessed even with all his years studying counter-surveillance and protective routines, was that the woman standing there was not European at all. The name on her Belgian passport, Christine, was a fiction. She was Sylvia Raphael, an Israeli operative born in South Africa, and she had spent the last 18 months building the path that led to this exact second. Behind her easy voice and casual manners was a mind trained to watch people, read rooms, handle weapons, and layer truth under steady deception. Mossad had sent her to Beirut with one task only: find this man, track him carefully, and help set the stage for his removal as the figure held responsible for the deaths of 11 Israeli athletes in Munich. Now, after months spent shaping trust and playing the role he expected, she stood in his doorway because he believed she belonged there. The Munich Massacre had taken place on September 5, 1972, during the Summer Olympics. 8 members of Black September slipped into the Olympic Village, killed 2 Israeli athletes on arrival, and seized 9 others as hostages. The standoff stretched over 21 hours, marked by failed talks, confused decisions by German officials, and a rescue plan that collapsed under its own poor design. The final clash at a military airfield ended with all 9 remaining hostages dead, along with 5 of the attackers and 1 German police officer. Scenes of hooded gunmen, terrified captives, and the later confirmation that no hostages had survived spread across the world and turned what should have been a peaceful global event into a reminder of how far armed groups were willing to go and how little protection international gatherings could offer. Israel reacted without hesitation. Prime Minister Golda Meir approved Operation Wrath of God, a covert campaign aimed squarely at the leadership of Black September. Mossad received full authority to track and kill those tied to Munich, no matter where they lived or how long the search lasted.
The intent was plain. Attacks on Israeli civilians would not fade into memory, and those behind them would not find shelter in distance, politics, or shifting alliances. Borders would not shield them. Diplomatic rules would not slow the response. The message was meant to be final and unmistakable. Strike Israel, and you will be found, whether it takes months, years, or longer. You will be judged, and you will die. At the very top of Mossad's list sat Ali Hassan Salameh. Born in 1940 in Kula near Jaffa, he grew up during the last years of the British Mandate and the fighting of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War that pushed thousands of Palestinians into refugee camps. His father, Hassan Salameh, was a well-known Arab commander who died in battle in 1948. Ali carried that history with him. He also carried the anger that came from years spent in camps where poverty, crowding, and daily loss shaped how he saw the world. By his early 20s, he had joined Fatah, the political and armed movement built by Yasser Arafat. He moved up fast. People around him noticed his calm intelligence, his confidence, and the way he handled planning work. Before long, he was leading Force 17, Arafat's personal protection group, while also serving as Chief of Operations for Black September. That group, created after the Jordanian army crushed Palestinian fighters in September 1970, acted as Fatah's off-the-books arm. It carried out attacks that Arafat could deny in public while still backing them behind the scenes. Salameh took charge of the Munich attack himself. He picked the men, set up their training, arranged weapons, secured money, and kept control of the process all the way through. From a safe house somewhere in Europe, he followed each update. Reports later said he seemed pleased when word reached him that the Israeli hostages were dead. Israeli intelligence had tracked him since the late 1960s, but Munich pushed him up to the highest threat level. Mossad built thick files on him, covering his habits, his routes, his contacts, and the way he hid his movements. They knew he shifted constantly between Beirut, Damascus, and several European cities. They knew he kept more than one safe place to retreat to. They knew he used different false identities and avoided patterns that could trap him. His Force 17 guards were trained to spot surveillance and to react fast with weapons. Mossad understood that taking him out would not be quick. It would take long stretches of patience, careful timing, and operatives able to live under cover for many months while waiting for a single opening. Sylvia Raphael was chosen for the mission in late 1972. She was born in South Africa to a Jewish family, moved to Israel while still young, served in the Israeli Defense Forces, and later entered Mossad in the mid-1960s. Her background made her useful.
A South African passport drew less attention in Arab areas and in European cities where Israeli documents triggered checks. Her English was fluent and steady, with an accent that fit many settings without raising questions. She also carried the traits Mossad needed for deep cover work: steady nerves, patience, and the ability to stay inside an assumed identity, even when stressed. Her training focused on what long-term infiltration really demands. She learned how to build and hold a cover story, how to manage small daily details so nothing felt false, how to watch people without being seen, and how to wait out long quiet periods before acting. Over time, she became the kind of operative Mossad relied on when a mission required slow, careful entry into a target's world and the discipline to stay in place until the moment arrived. She spent long months studying European habits and social cues, working until she could slip into the kinds of places where Salame and the people around him moved. She learned how to notice small signs that someone might be tailing her and how to shake surveillance in a way that looked casual, not staged. She trained with firearms and basic explosives, even though her main task was intelligence work, not pulling triggers. She also went through steady psychological conditioning meant to harden her for the weight of deep cover life, where she would go long stretches without speaking to anyone who knew her real name or her past. The job demanded living like a ghost, staying sane while cut off from family and friends for months at a time. The plan drawn up to reach Salame was slow, careful, and built in several layers. The first phase focused on building Sylvia's new identity as Christine Bernard, a Belgian freelance photographer who moved between European cities and the Middle East. Mossad built the identity from the ground up, forged birth papers, school files, work references, bank accounts funded in ways that could not be traced, and a photography portfolio tied to Christine, complete with photos that had already appeared in European magazines. They secured an apartment for her in Brussels and shaped a believable pattern of work trips so her movements matched those of a real freelancer. The second phase required slipping her into the same spaces Salama used. Reports showed he kept homes in Beirut and Damascus and often flew to major European cities to meet other Palestinian figures and sympathetic European networks. Beirut looked like the best entry point. The city's fractured security scene, split among militias and rival intelligence branches, created enough noise to hide foreign operatives. A large expatriate population meant Europeans blended in easily, and Salame spent long periods in the city, making it practical for her to position herself nearby and build a pathway toward him. Sylvia landed in Beirut in March 1973, half a year after Munich.
She took a small apartment in the Hamra district, a busy area filled with students, reporters, professors, and many foreigners. She built her life there as a working photographer, shooting cultural events, attending gallery shows, capturing daily moments on the streets, and meeting people in the cafes that drew the city's international crowd. Her cover held strong because so much of it was grounded in truth. She actually made photographs, actually sold some to European outlets through Mossad's contacts, and actually lived the unpredictable routine of a freelancer trying to build a career in a complicated city. The real difficulty was finding a path to Salama that did not look forced. Approaching him outright would be reckless. Turning up at his usual spots, asking about him, or trying to reach him through Palestinian figures would raise alarms fast. Any obvious attempt to get close would trigger security checks and close off her access before she even started. Sylvia did not rely on direct approaches. Instead, she used a method known as natural development. She set up situations where Salama would run into her over and over, in ways that looked random. The goal was to let familiarity build slowly until speaking with her felt normal, not staged. She learned his routines through observations carried out by other Mossad teams, already living in Beirut. They followed him for many weeks, watching where he went, which streets he trusted, which places he liked. They noted every habit he repeated. They learned that he returned to a certain cafe in Hamra several afternoons each week. He usually sat by himself, flipping through newspapers, while his guards waited outside and pretended not to watch the door. Sylvia started showing up there too. She always arrived a little earlier than he did. She always picked a table close enough to be noticed, but not close enough to feel forced. She stayed focused on her camera gear, cleaning lenses, checking light meters, sorting through contact sheets. She played the part of a quiet foreign photographer who barely registered the people around her. After about 3 weeks of this steady, quiet pattern, Salame finally paid attention. It was bound to happen. A woman alone, appearing again and again with the same stack of equipment, formed a pattern his mind could not ignore. His instinct for surveillance and danger flagged her presence, though he did not read it as a threat right away. One afternoon, his eyes paused on her Leica, a pricey camera that hinted at real work and not casual vacation shots. He asked her in English if she was a journalist. His tone balanced real interest with a security check. He needed to know whether she fit into any risk category or if she was simply another foreigner trying to understand Beirut. Sylvia answered in English, carrying the light Belgian accent that Mossad language trainers had drilled into her until it felt natural.
She said she was a freelance photographer working on a photo series about Beirut's endurance during ongoing political strain. She let him look at a few prints she kept with her. They showed busy streets, markets, older buildings, and narrow alleys, nothing that hinted at espionage or strategic targets. She added that she had moved to Beirut not long ago and found the place compelling despite all its contradictions. Then she asked whether he was Lebanese. The question was simple, gentle, and safe, giving him room to choose how much to reveal. He told her his name was Ali and that he worked in import and export. The description was vague on purpose, offering the kind of cover story longtime operatives used without hesitation. It gave enough identity to hold a conversation, but protected everything else behind a wall of ambiguity. They ended up talking for about 20 minutes that first day. They touched on the city's past, the mix of cultures that shaped it, and the difficulty of living in a place influenced by sectarian divides and armed groups. Nothing about the talk stood out. It felt ordinary, calm, and believable, exactly what Sylvia wanted. It was the kind of passing conversation two strangers might have anywhere when the setting felt open and the moment felt safe. In the months that followed, these meetings continued in the same natural rhythm. Sometimes they exchanged only a few words. Other times the talk stretched much longer, drifting through small observations, small stories, and the kind of personal details that do not feel personal until much later. Each encounter layered more familiarity, more trust, and more room for the next step. Sylvia held her distance with care. She never pushed him to share anything private, never hinted at meeting anywhere except the cafe, and always let him decide how fast or how deep their talks would go. She knew winning over a target like Salame took patience, and any sign that she was too curious would only make him wary. Her task was to seem engaging, but never needy, visible, yet not chasing him. Someone he could get used to seeing now and then, but not so often that it felt arranged or suspicious. By June 1973, the shift was clear. Salame started looking for her on his own instead of waiting to bump into her. He would walk in, scan the room, and relax only when he saw her. At times, he even moved seats to sit closer. His questions became more direct. He wanted to know where she had grown up, why she had chosen photography, what she made of Lebanese politics. Sylvia shaped her replies to fit her cover story, but she added small touches of truth so her answers landed as natural and believable. She spoke about her childhood in Brussels, her art and photography studies in Paris, and long stretches of travel across Europe and North Africa before she settled for a while in Beirut.
All of it matched her legend and would hold up if anyone on Salame's side ran background checks, which MSAD fully expected. The turning point came when Salame asked her to dinner. That invitation marked a move from casual chats to something closer to real connection, a sign he now viewed her as someone worth knowing outside the routine of the cafe. Sylvia accepted with easy enthusiasm and proposed a restaurant she knew was neutral ground, a place where neither Palestinian intelligence nor Mossad watchers would stand out. The dinner worked on two levels, a normal social outing on the surface and, underneath, a controlled intelligence effort. Sylvia observed how he carried himself, what he liked, what irritated him, and how he explained the world around him, all while keeping her role intact. Over dinner, he spoke with more freedom than he ever had at the cafe. He mentioned constant travel tied to his work, hinted at friction with rivals, though he avoided naming them, and shared a weary view of Middle Eastern politics that sounded like someone operating within those systems day after day. He asked whether Christine, as he believed her to be, ever felt nervous living in a city as unstable as Beirut. Sylvia told him she relied on her instincts and stayed clear of anything that felt risky. It was honest enough, though the irony hung between them. She was sharing a meal with one of the world's most hunted men. In the months that followed, their connection grew more layered. Salame was clearly drawn to Sylvia, her calm, her self-reliance, and the way she lived outside the Palestinian political world that forced him to stay guarded with nearly everyone else. Sylvia matched his interest just enough to hold his trust, but she kept limits that fit a person wary of starting anything too serious. She navigated that balance smoothly, letting the relationship progress while never losing control of the role she was meant to play. She knew that if she let herself seem too available, he would start taking her for granted, and if she pulled back too much, he would simply drift away. Keeping that middle line took steady attention, almost a constant check of her own reactions and his. By late 1973, Salame felt sure enough of Sylvia to open up more than he had before. He told her he was involved in Palestinian resistance work. He framed it as political duty, not random violence. He spoke about the pressure Palestinians lived under and why, in his view, armed action against Israeli occupation was the only path left. He never said straight out that he had a hand in Black September or Munich. He stayed careful on that point, holding to the discipline expected from someone in his position. But the way he talked, the level of detail he allowed himself, made it clear to Sylvia that she was listening to someone who worked close to the core of the groups that planned and carried out attacks. The information she collected during those months was unlike anything she had gathered before. She picked up on the tensions inside the Palestinian movement, the rivalries between Fatah and other factions, and the uneasy relationships with Syrian and Lebanese authorities who sheltered these groups while trying to steer or restrain them. She learned the places where Salame met other operatives, the safe houses set aside for planning,
and the travel habits that hinted at future operations. She kept track of names, faces, and the way different people connected. All of it became material Mossad analysts could use to map out the structure of Palestinian militant networks. Getting that information to her handlers took careful work. She could not risk open or frequent contact, since Lebanese intelligence and Palestinian security both watched foreigners who stayed too long or moved too freely. So she relied on dead drops, leaving coded notes in fixed spots where other Mossad personnel collected them. When something urgent came up, she used coded phone calls routed through a number in Rome that bounced through several layers before reaching Tel Aviv. And every so often she met her handler outside Lebanon, taking short trips to Cyprus or Athens that fit neatly with her cover as a photographer on assignment. The most critical stretch of the operation began in January 1974. Mossad picked up intelligence showing that Salameh planned to travel to Lillehammer, Norway. He would meet European supporters there and arrange funding for upcoming Palestinian operations. Several sources confirmed the trip, including Sylvia's reporting, and together they opened a window for a direct strike. Lillehammer was a small place, far easier to work in than Beirut, with its noise, confusion, and heavy security presence. Norwegian police offered little resistance to a foreign intelligence service working quietly, and Salameh would not have the heavy protection he relied on in Lebanon. That made him exposed in a way he almost never was. Mossad sent a team to Lillehammer, people trained to follow a target, check his identity, and kill him without losing control of the environment. Sylvia, meanwhile, was told to stay in Beirut. Her job was to keep her relationship with Salameh steady, to remain close enough that nothing in her behavior would hint that an operation was already in motion elsewhere. The operational outline looked simple on paper. Teams on surveillance duty would track the target, note where he stayed, where he walked, and when he moved without protection. The group assigned to carry out the killing would wait for a moment when he was alone, carry out the hit fast, then everyone involved would pull out at once, leaving Norway before local authorities had time to react or even understand what had happened. In reality, nothing went as planned. On July 21, 1974, the Mossad team opened fire on a man strolling through Lillehammer with his pregnant wife. They believed they were eliminating Salameh, but the person they killed was Ahmed Bouchiki, a Moroccan waiter with no ties to any militant group. The entire mistake came from weak intelligence, rushed assumptions, and surveillance that failed to confirm even the basics. After the shooting, Norwegian police moved quickly. Several Mossad operatives were caught while trying to escape, among them Sylvia Raphael, who had been brought in to double-check the surveillance work even though her main posting was in Beirut. Once the arrests became public, many details of Operation Wrath of God surfaced. Information Israeli intelligence had worked hard to keep hidden. Norwegian authorities charged the captured operatives, and courts later convicted 5 of them for murder or involvement in the killing, handing down prison terms from 2 to 5 years. The case created a serious backlash. Israel's standing in Europe took a hit, and intelligence services that had previously turned a blind eye to Mossad activity began distancing themselves. News outlets covered the affair heavily, bringing the assassination program into open view and forcing Israel to admit what it had long tried to keep vague. For Sylvia Raphael, the Lillehammer mess ended her life in the field. Once imprisoned in Norway, she could not continue using the Christine Bernard identity, and her long undercover run collapsed. Her real name came out during the trial, erasing years of effort and exposing her to threats from Palestinian groups that now knew an Israeli operative had worked close to them. She spent 22 months in a Norwegian prison before a prisoner exchange sent her back to Israel. After that, she stayed out of operational roles for the rest of her life. Because Salome survived Lillehammer, others had to take over the pursuit. Mossad teams watched him across Beirut, Damascus, and several European cities while he kept coordinating Black September activity. The work grew harder. Without Sylvia's access and contacts, gathering reliable information took more time. And Salome, aware after Lillehammer that Mossad was hunting him, tightened his security, changed his routines, and avoided predictable patterns. A break finally came in January 1979, close to 7 years after Munich. Fresh intelligence showed that Salome had settled into a rhythm in Beirut, living in the Verdun area with his wife, Lebanese beauty queen Georgina Risk. He moved often between his home and meetings with PLO officials, following routes that surveillance teams tracked in detail, hoping this time the operation would not repeat the mistakes of Lillehammer. The plan was simple on paper, but carried a heavy weight in practice.
A car loaded with explosives would be left along his usual path, and the device would be triggered from a distance the moment his motorcade rolled past. That was the whole idea. On January 22, 1979, when Salome's car moved through Verdun the way it always did, Mossad operatives watched for the right second and set off the charge. The blast tore through the street. Salome died on the spot, along with his 4 bodyguards and 4 civilians who had no connection to the mission and were unlucky enough to be close when it happened. The goal was reached, but the civilian deaths brought strong criticism from abroad and raised doubts about Israel's claims that such operations could be carried out with a level of accuracy that kept bystanders safe. Sylvia Raphael heard about the killing only through the news. By then, she had been out of the field for years and no longer had any part in the chain of decisions. The report left her with mixed feelings that did not settle quickly. She felt some relief since the man tied to Munich had finally faced consequences. But she also felt real anger at how long the effort had dragged on and how many people had died along the way, people who had nothing to do with the conflict. And beneath those reactions sat a deeper sadness tied to her own past. She had spent years pretending to be someone else, forming connections she knew she would later break, lying to people who trusted her, and giving up pieces of her own life in service of a mission that ended in arrest and public shame. The hidden strain carried by deep cover work rarely shows up in the usual stories about intelligence triumphs. Agents who spent years living as invented characters often walk away unsure of who they are. Sylvia faced that confusion after leaving the Norwegian prison. She had lived as Christine Bernard for so long that returning to being Sylvia Raphael felt less like coming home and more like slipping into another mask. The line separating her real self from the role she had played had blurred until it was hard to see where one ended and the other began. She later married an Israeli businessman and tried to rebuild something that looked like an ordinary life, far from the world of intelligence, but ordinary stayed out of reach. She could not speak openly about her past, held in place by secrecy rules that prevented her from sharing even basic details. She found it hard to form close friendships with people who had not gone through anything similar, since most civilians could not grasp what it meant to live for years inside a fabricated life. And she could not shake the knowledge that her work had relied on steering emotions, bending trust, and crossing lines that most people never face. Mossad gave returning deep cover operatives little support once their missions ended. The organization trained them well for the field, but the help offered afterward was thin and often missed the real problem.
Sylvia did receive some counseling, but it focused mostly on the stress tied to dangerous situations, rather than the deeper identity damage that comes from living as someone else for so long. She was expected to return to ordinary life as if nothing had shifted, thankful for having served Israel and ready to believe that every sacrifice had been necessary for national security. Yet the story of Sylvia Raphael exposes how intelligence work carries hidden burdens and how the people who execute these missions often pay more than anyone admits. She was a remarkably skilled operative who completed tasks that very few could have managed. Her work gathering intelligence in Beirut offered rare detail on Palestinian militant networks. Her patience in spending many months building trust with Salameh showed a level of commitment that agencies praise as the highest form of professionalism. But reaching that level meant reshaping herself so fully that her original sense of self faded. It meant using carefully crafted emotions and gaining trust only to bend it toward operational goals, leaving marks that stayed with her long after the missions ended. It meant accepting imprisonment, public exposure, and the collapse of her career in the field, treating these losses as part of the job, even though the mission's final results appeared only many years after her role had ended. The question that runs through Sylvia's story is whether these kinds of operations are truly justified by what they accomplish. The intelligence she secured came at real personal cost. The killing of Salameh 7 years after Munich may have prevented attacks, or it may have simply continued a pattern in which violence triggers more violence, each death fueling anger that pushes new recruits into militant groups. Israeli intelligence argues that targeted killings serve strategic ends beyond removing one individual. They are meant to show that attacks on Israeli civilians bring consequences. They aim to weaken militant structures by taking out leaders with deep experience. And they send a message that no hiding place lasts forever, and no protective network can guarantee safety from Israel's reach. Critics see the situation differently. They claim that these killings inflame communities, turning the dead into symbols whose stories inspire more aggression than their actions ever did. They point to the Lillehammer disaster as proof that even advanced services can commit grave mistakes when under pressure, and they challenge whether any state can justify carrying out extrajudicial killings on another country's territory, breaching sovereignty and international law in the name of protecting its own citizens. Sylvia Raphael died in 2005 at age 67, having spent her later years far from public attention. She gave only a few interviews, kept limited ties with Mossad, and seemed to struggle with depression and the lingering weight of her earlier life.
Friends described her as someone who never felt settled, neither in identity nor place. Burdened by memories of the versions of herself she had adopted and the roles she had played. Her standing inside Mossad remains complicated. She is recalled as a rare kind of operative, someone whose steady work helped map out how Palestinian militant groups functioned during a tense stretch in the region. Her ability to recruit and manage sources in Beirut showed a calm precision that very few operatives ever reached, and the fact that she kept working after the Lillehammer disaster said a lot about the resolve the organization counted on. At the same time, her path became a steady reminder of what long-term cover can do to a person's mind. Mossad later adjusted how it prepared and supported people sent into deep cover, adding tighter psychological screening before deployment, more consistent check-ins with handlers, and broader care once assignments ended. The lesson drawn from Sylvia's experience was simple. Operatives are not machines, and switching in and out of identities leaves marks that do not fade overnight. Operation Wrath of God carried on through the late 1970s and early 1980s, slowing only when most Black September figures had either been removed or pushed so far into hiding that pursuing them no longer made sense. Mossad concluded that the campaign met its main goals, breaking up Black September's ability to plan attacks and showing that killing Israeli civilians carried clear consequences. But the effort also stirred criticism abroad, tightening diplomatic pressure on Israel and setting examples that other governments later pointed to when building their own programs for targeted killings. The Munich Massacre stayed at the center of this history, shaping how Israel understood itself and how Mossad evolved. The deaths of 11 athletes shook the country, creating demands for action that would show the state could shield its people and respond forcefully to those who harmed them. Operation Wrath of God grew out of that demand. It blended intelligence collection, patient surveillance and deliberate strikes across several continents for nearly a decade. Sylvia Raphael played a meaningful role in that work, even if she did not complete every part of what she started. She delivered information that helped MSAD map Salame's network and habits. She showed that women could manage deep cover roles just as well as men, especially in settings that relied on social chemistry and subtle psychological pressure. And she carried personal costs that underlined how hard it is to live between duty and deception. The apartment door in Beirut that swung open at 2:47 a.m. captured all of this. It was an opening created by months of careful relationship building and at the same time a point of no return.
It marked the instant when operational needs crashed into human ties, when Christine's warm expression hid Sylvia's real mission, and when the woman Salome had come to trust finally revealed herself as someone placed in his life to set the conditions for his death. That scene never unfolded in the precise way it is often told. Sylvia never appeared in Salome's doorway late at night, never framed herself in that charged moment people like to imagine. What actually happened was far more ordinary in form, even if heavy in consequence. Steady watching from a safe distance, slow extraction of details through casual talk, and then arrest before the mission had any chance to reach the outcome planners expected. Still, the imagined scene shows something real about her work and about intelligence work as a whole. It reflects the strange mix of closeness and betrayal that defines the job, the use of emotional connection to meet goals that eventually break the trust that connection produced. Whether Sylvia's actions should be seen as brave or sad depends on who is looking. Israeli intelligence views her as someone who carried out her role with skill, collected vital information, and accepted serious risks along the way. Others see a woman who turned personal ties into tools for state needs, who shaped feelings to push conversations in certain directions, and who misled people whose greatest mistake was believing her. Each side holds a piece of the truth. This kind of work functions inside a fog where choices do not fit clean labels of right or wrong. Sylvia Raphael moved through that fog every day, convinced that her work mattered, even as she absorbed pressures and inner damage she could not have fully grasped at the start. Her story shows duty and persistence, but also harm and the weight of using people as means to an end. It exposes what intelligence services can do when they mold ordinary individuals into living covers. And it shows the personal cost of carrying such roles for long stretches of time. There was no polished charm in her missions, none of the champagne-soaked atmosphere linked to other Mossad operations. She used different tools, patience, quiet reading of emotions, long hours building trust through a kind of sincerity that felt real yet rested on a foundation of lies. And when the mission collapsed instead of succeeding, when she ended up behind bars instead of receiving praise, the price became plain in a way victories usually hide or downplay. Many decades after Munich, after Lila, after Salome's death in Beirut, Sylvia Raphael's experience still lingers as proof that these operations rely on real people who must live with their choices long after the world forgets the details. The woman who earned the confidence of a terrorist, who gathered material that helped set the path toward his death, and who spent years wearing an identity that never belonged to her, carried wounds that no celebration could fix. Her legacy is not a clean win or a simple loss. It is a tangle of duty, damage, and conflict, a life spent serving goals that demanded letting go of the very parts of life that give it weight and meaning.